So today I'm going to be chatting with you about the second debate among the Democratic candidates for presidential primary election. In the previous two videos, I talked about night one on June 26th. Now I'm going to be talking to you about the June 27th debate, the second slate of 10 candidates. Before I do that, I've got to tell you that it's amazing how, for me anyway, intellectually stimulating it is to watch and contemplate and analyze these kinds of debates. I believe that the experience of these presidential debates is very socially, culturally, nationally, humanistically, very special. I'm not aware of anything else that brings so many people together on a sort of intellectual level. There's an argument to be made in appreciating certain academic enterprises. However, I think it's important to note that one of the problems with academia is that it sometimes locks itself in what we call the ivory tower. So sometimes much of society gets excluded from events that a university might hold, or a debate that a university might hold, or research that a university is publishing or releasing. And by the way, it's expensive too if you want access to scholarly journals, and it's usually written for specialists too. So I think that there is something, I don't know if populist is the right word, about these televised political debates, both the primaries and when we get into the general election. There's just something very special about it, and I wanted to point that out, that we are in the midst not just of what may be one of the most important elections of perhaps the century. Certainly, to my recollection, this would be the most important election since the election for JFK, in my mind, as I understand it, when the pressure for more appreciation for civil rights and the plight of the poor was finally brought front and center. And JFK, he was the one who said we should go to the moon. I mean, it was a time when we really needed to, it's the words that Bernie Sanders, Senator of Vermont, Bernie Sanders, likes to talk about, revolution. You can see I did write a blog post a couple weeks ago about how we really are living in revolutionary times in the midst of an extremely revolutionary debate. I believe that Democratic primary hopeful Andrew Yang is very eloquent in articulating this. By the way, he got totally unfair treatment from MSNBC. They gave him, according to Hill, not more than 2 minutes and 50 seconds compared to Joe Biden, who got about 12 minutes of overall speaking time. And I'll talk more about Andrew Yang in a bit. However, it just crosses my mind because he was someone who, in my opinion, is actually very right on in his awareness of what needs to be said about where we are economically and culturally. Not that he's necessarily my top choice for president at this point in time, or my last choice either. I need to learn more about him. However, it is rather disturbing how little respect he was given by MSNBC, and frankly how blatant their disregard for him was. I'm not sure what the rationale is, or what people are thinking about that, or why they didn't appear to learn from 2016 and how Senator Bernie Sanders was treated. They just keep on making the same damn mistake over and over again. You've got to do more to have truly fair debates and create a political setup that's not so blatantly rigged. And I think that Senator Gillibrand of New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, she really understands this and articulates this really well, by the way, which is why she's certainly up on the top for me. Anyway, if you saw the last two videos, you may know that my approach to this is to talk to you essentially about the candidates I find most concerning and the ones that I found most impressive, with the others being neither impressive or totally concerning, and so sort of mediocre and or people I need to learn more about didn't get enough of a look at based on the debate and things. So that's out there. But first, I did tell you that I consider these debates extraordinarily stimulating intellectually. And so I did come away with a few evolved viewpoints in contemplating these last two nights of 10 people debates. We got to hear really from a lot of people and really try to wrap our minds around some pertinent political questions of our time. So there were a few things I wanted to talk to you about that just really that are new or more fully, I think, consciously held, understood views that I find myself having. And the first thought I have is on healthcare. Now, I do think there's a bit of complexity about, at the end of the day, the exact things that we do to ensure that everyone receives top quality healthcare. But something did come to my mind as I was listening to people debate this and thinking about the implications of those who might choose to opt in on the public option versus those who might want to keep their private insurance. And that's this. I think you have to ask yourself ethically, why should one person receive better, finer healthcare, health insurance and healthcare than somebody else just because they make more money? Does how much money you make really reflect how important you are, or how good you are, or how decent you are, or how much more you deserve to live than other people? That's a really degrading, dangerous, I think sickening view of humanity. And so I think as we talk about healthcare, I don't think actually that the debate on healthcare is as simple as saying, well, if you want to keep your private insurance, keep it, and everyone else will get the public option. As if it were a fact that actually the private health insurance will ultimately be better and will ultimately be able to cover what public can't cover. That concerns me a little bit because there's no reason, in my opinion, why, let's say, someone should get, the cheapest version of healthcare where other people should get the finest that can be offered. I think there are kinds of commodities and services that people should have a lot of choice with respect to. But when it comes to health insurance, and I really actually do quite like the way Andrew Yang puts it. If you check out his website, yang2020.com, he talks about, quote, humans are more important than money, close quote. And I agree. Humans are more important than money. And preserving human life and doing everything we can to help one another thrive for as long as possible, I think that's an important ethical goal. And I think that putting too much emphasis on leaving a lot of openness for private health insurance as the ultimately superior health insurance that, well, those who are lucky enough to make a lot of money should go on and get, while everyone else gets the crap junk buy-in towards some ideological achievement that seems to miss the point of why there is even a conversation about universal healthcare, single buyer system. To me, that's something we need to talk a lot more about, in my opinion. So I'm not 100% certain just yet what the exact moves need to be on healthcare. I definitely understand and appreciate that it would seem irrational that you just snap your fingers and private healthcare insurance would just be abolished just like that. That to me would appear to be hasty, irrational, not thinking through, and I would imagine would do a bit of a shock to our economy. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just to me would seem too radical, and that maybe it should be a piecemeal approach, which is why I really like the way people like Buttigieg and Gillibrand talk about how the ultimate goal should actually be universal healthcare, but allowing people a public option in that context of moving towards universal healthcare makes sense, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, like Biden supports pretty much just building on Obamacare. That would be an example. So that's sort of the first viewpoint that I've had that's sort of becoming more elaborate. Again, thanks to the thoughtfulness and stimulation of these last two debates. The second point would be this, and I didn't expect myself to come to this conclusion. It's something I've been thinking about for several months now. And I actually want to give a shout out to my friend Montanez Stills, who I worked with at the tutoring center at Mercer County Community College, who actually was the one who emphatically argued his point of view with respect to this topic and pushed me to really sit on it and contemplate it. Initially, I was opposed to the idea of a universal basic income, and I was concerned about it because I was afraid that it might promote laziness, or that it was unsustainable, or those were really the two big concerns, or that it might promote this idea of entitlement, that people just get money, and that it facilitates the growth, the development of an entitlement mentality. However, having really watched and listened to people talk about our economy and tax credits and government contracts and how we move the various slices of the pie through our economy, whether you think about it in a purely capitalistic libertarian context, a socialist, or a mixed economy context, a few things have become clear to me. And certainly it is this. While we remain in a system where if you're lucky, you get a government contract. If you just so happen to work for Lockheed Martin and participate in the top echelons of weapon manufacturing and production and dealing, and you get a nice wad of the astronomical amount of money that we spend as taxpayers on this weapons production and all these various military projects. We just spend so much on military. We're going to dole out all that money, and you're lucky enough that you just happen to be born, you just happen to develop into a person who is going to end up in that field. Or now we're talking about maybe investing in green energy. So, for example, Elizabeth Warren wants to give money to people for research and development in green energy enterprises. And while I'm not sure I'm 100% opposed to some form of that, it occurs to me that some people, if they're lucky, will get government handouts. Well, that's one phrase you could use, right? Or you could say government subsidies, money from the government and or the taxpayer, however you want to phrase it. It seems unfair to me that some people will gain access to that while other people don't. Now that's not a, that can't, I don't believe, I do not believe in the short term that is something to fix very easily. I do believe, however, a way to move us towards a more universal approach to addressing matters of poverty and disconcerting income disparity, inequity, etc., is this concept that Andrew Yang has been talking about, a universal basic income. Now, he proposes $1,000 a month. I don't know if that's the right math. I don't know if that's the right number. I don't know how one comes to that number. I've got more research to do to inquire as to how he arrives at that number and why he didn't arrive at another number. To what degree there was a method to his madness. By the way, if you want to leave a comment on this, if you've got thoughts on how he did, didn't, should, or shouldn't, etc., I'm definitely interested in finding that out. But it seems to me we're having this debate over like what should the government invest in. And I mean, this is a universal or international global conversation. If you look at the development of a country like India, for example, and how India was adamant about when they had their independence from Great Britain, and they resisted foreign investment in their country economically, because they wanted to jumpstart their own economy and get a sense of economic independence. And their view to that was, the view on how to do that was for the government to invest a little. Now, Elizabeth Warren has this really great quote. It turns out the quote is a bad quote because it would appear, according to an article by the Washington Post, if you check out my previous blog on the previous debate, you can see in fuller detail how the Washington Post talks about this, but it would appear she actually said some dishonest, disingenuous things in this quote. However, she makes this point about how, just a little bit of government investment can bring another person a long way. And I agree with that. I shall tell you that I am where I am today in a home that, to me, is a place I may actually never want to leave the community I live in here in Basking Ridge. And even in this particular development within Basking Ridge that I live in, it's beyond stunningly beautiful. It goes beyond speaking to my geographic aesthetics and ideals. I'm in love. If it was not for assistance through affordable housing, if it was not through assistance of financial aid too, to help me finish my education and develop the way of thinking that I have through the knowledge that I've gained, if it wasn't through the assistance of my grandparents who were lucky enough to have some extra money, if it wasn't for my mother and stepfather who were so generous as to help me out financially in times of serious distress, my brother Matt as well, and other people at various times who have been so generous as to invest in my sustaining myself at various times. If it wasn't for that, I'm concerned I really wouldn't be where I am today. And it really goes a long way to maximizing the quality of someone's life, and not so that they can then settle, but so that they can then try to make a lot more out of it. It's this concept of investment, right? Like if we're talking about an investment in green energy or something, you put a little bit of money into it, like an angel investor does, and see how it grows. Why shouldn't we invest in all people? We have this conversation about subsidizing, for example, college education. But as Pete Buttigieg points out, people should have a good quality of life even if college is not for them. Because, number one, the notion of college not being for you is not necessarily a consequence of you not being smart enough. It could just be that you have an intellectual capacity for trades that aren't adequately in place for instruction at the university platform, at the university level or college level. That really could be the case. It could also be that you're someone with very entrepreneurial spirit who is also very good at being an autodidact, and you could, self-teach, therefore, and come away and do something very creative and useful. And college may not necessarily be for you. This is not to say that I think college is a bad thing. I'm, like I said, beyond grateful that it was for me and that I had that opportunity. But A, it's not for everybody. And B, it is so unaffordable that even with financial aid, the burden that comes with paying back debt, and the fact that college is no job guarantee, college is no income guarantee. College might help you towards that end. It may or may not. There are a lot of factors that might go into that, but the bottom line is that as this economy is drastically changing, college is not always the practical option, step forward for someone, because academically, or intellectually rather, entrepreneurially, universities just don't provide what they are best equipped to do. But also, it's just not always like a economically practical thing to do anymore. It really isn't. You could go into a lot of debt, receive a decent education, and have no guarantee of a job. Or you could scour the internet for informational resources and critically think about it along the way and try to make money based on whatever it is that you can offer and not go into such debt. Which would you do if you could? And why or why not? There is an argument to be made against going to college if it's not a financially smart idea for you. 4 years ago, I actually might not have had that position. Not just because now I'm out of college, but having gone to college when I saw that it seemed that I should, it seems to me that the economy has been changing really just in the last several years. The last thing that really crossed my mind that has been developing as an idea, a thought in contemplating these debates, this idea of pandering. Before I proceed, I want to be clear about one thing. I care very much about diversity. I care very much about the fact that I apologize about that. I know that's really loud and disruptive and ruins the quality of this video, and it's distracting. It concerns me, the kinds of social injustice that we see and the oppression that various minority groups suffer, whether it's the police brutality or economic disparity of African Americans, or we see it as well with Native Americans. Some Native Americans have such a poor quality of life that their homeless rates on various reservations are like over 80% of the population, and the life expectancy is like hauntingly low. And by the way, that's something that just doesn't even get addressed. For all the conversation that we hear for awareness of LGBTQ people, African Americans, and Latinx populations, we don't always hear about Asian populations. We don't always hear about Jews. We don't always hear about, even if we talk about Black people, there are subgroups of Black people, right? There are actual African immigrants, and there are Caribbean Islanders, people from the Caribbean islands, and there are people who are black skinned but have lived here in continental United States for a long time. I mean, it's just so when we try too hard, I think, to pick a few groups that we have super concern for and throw everyone else to the side, right? What about Arabic people, Middle Eastern people, Indian people? I mean, Indian like from the country India or Pakistan, or Muslims or Hindus, etc. There are just a number of different minority groups that get cast to the side, I believe, if there is too much attention placed on just one group. Now look, that's not to discount the fact that, in fact, African Americans in particular are, I think, brutally treated in this country and suffer perhaps among the worst when it comes to oppressed minority groups. But again, I have to bring up, so do Native Americans, but you hear very, 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 very little conversation about the catastrophes that exist on their reservations and how little is done about that. Because we don't have so many Native American candidates running for president who can put so much attention to it as a representative of that group, right? So I get concerned then when you have someone who does this kind of pandering thing by trying to, it appears, by trying to like sort of play to a group and not even go all out in doing it, but just say a few words about them and think that you're gaining these like extra points for being hip and cool and liberal and open-minded and diverse. To me, it comes across at times as disingenuous and only transactional, as opposed to actually having concern for the fact that some people fall into the demographic category of minority and are oppressed or have a lower quality of life because they're not treated as good as the white heterosexual male. And the individual I thought who pandered the most is actually Eric Swalwell, Representative Eric Swalwell of California, because he goes into this whole, as Bernie Sanders put it, in an interview at the end of the debate last night, he's kind of an ageist. The mantra for Eric Swalwell seems to be, pass the torch, pass the torch, pass the torch. The young people are the ones who can save the world, not the old people. I mean, that's really disturbing to me. And not just because it is ageist, but because it's blatantly like trying, it seems to me, an attempt to appeal to and pander to millennials, people in my age group and younger, or people slightly older who think that he's just so cool, or, for doing that. So that ends part 1 of these videos on debate 1 round 2 of the second slate of candidates. I wanted to get all this out, so in the next video I'm going to go through the candidates and those who most concerned me and those who most impressed me.